Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Now, I apologise for repeating myself, but I do know that because I bombard your podcast feeds with so many podcast episodes, with literally one a day, that you don't get to listen to every single episode. And I suspect that many of you will dip into tech topics that particularly interest you. So if you have heard this, I apologise, but we're heading towards 1,000 interviews with tech leaders from all over the world. And I want to try and give something back to everybody listening. And I think we've got around 6 weeks now until we hit that 1,000 episodes. So I'm thinking about a giveaway of some sort. So I need your advice on the kind of swag that you think would be cool, or the kind of giveaway idea that you think would be cool. Because this is your show too. It's not just mine. We're in this together, and I'd love for you to point me in the right direction on here. And you can do that by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, or if you go to my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, scroll to the bottom and you'll find all the social channels where you can send me a cheeky DM on too. But today, I want to talk about the hot topic of cybersecurity, because I've invited the guys from Ericom Software onto the show today. And the reason for that is because of their unique approach. Because traditionally, cybersecurity will just involves assuming that everything on an internal network is completely safe, but it distrusts anything coming in. But they're promoting something called zero trust browsing, which it trusts nothing at all, but also gets that right balance by not slowing a machine down and not ruining that end user experience. And this completely captured my imagination because I've not seen anything like this before. So let's get him on and find out more about it. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to North Virginia in the US. So we can speak with David, who's the Ericom Software President and CEO, about their zero trust security approach and much, much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little more about who you are and what you do?
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Neil. Thanks for inviting me in. And my name is David Canellis. I'm Chief Executive Officer of Ericom Software. And just briefly, my background is over 2 decades of experience in the cybersecurity industry. And I've worked with large organizations like Symantec and Blue Coat and Naspers, and smaller and innovative companies like Ericom. I joined Ericom earlier this year, at the beginning of January, to help lead the company and focus on the continuing development and growth of our cybersecurity portfolio.
Well, I'm genuinely excited to get you on the podcast today because cybersecurity is such a hot topic at the moment, but it's also an increasingly crowded market. So for everybody listening, I've got to ask, can you tell me what it is that makes Ericom stand out from the crowd?
You're right, Neil. It indeed is a very hot topic, cybersecurity, and rightfully so, given all the advanced threats that we're seeing in the landscapes, and the organizations of all sides need to operate indeed in this market. So, if we think about the market, you're absolutely right. It is quite crowded, and so let me touch on Ericom's specific segment, which is we market to the B2B enterprise cybersecurity market, and the more crowded areas tend to be in the older, more mature technologies like endpoint and firewalls that were really relevant before the advent and the mainstream of cloud computing, mobility, and high-speed data networks. And of course, users are now roaming everywhere and they need access to systems. And so really, we've seen a shift where the perimeter was around the company, and now the perimeter is around the individual user. And so what Ericom's been focusing on is innovative areas such as zero trust browsing, which is a service that's underpinned by some real novel technology that we've developed, which helps keep employees secure while they browse the internet and click on links in emails or even download attachments. And zero trust browsing is less crowded since it's really hard problem to solve. And if you think about what that means is, how do I interact with the World Wide Web and the internet while ensuring that anything that I touch, whether it's a URL, an attachment, and what have you, isn't malicious. So we're going to spend a little time talking about that, but we also combine our browser isolation services with other Ericom products in our portfolio to really allow simple, secure access for authenticated users to connect to the corporate systems that they're allowed to connect. So we have differentiated our proposition about securing end users while they connect out to the internet, to services like the web and to email, as well as remotely connect in to corporate resources. And when you think about that combination of in and out and in, that's what's resonating with our customers in the general cybersecurity market.
And there's so much talk at the moment about machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence, and good guys and bad guys using the same tools against each other. But what really stood out for me when I was researching you guys is your zero trust model. So can you tell me a little bit more about that and that unique approach that you're taking?
Yeah, that's a great point, Neil. And let me just briefly start out with the traditional approach to security, where everything on the inside of the network was assumed to be trusted. So you're an employee, you're inside a perimeter, inside the company, you were trusted. And if you happen to be external to the organization and you had the ability to remote access into the organization, you were first allowed to enter into the network. And then at that point, the systems would verify and authenticate that you were indeed permitted to access certain assets within the organization. In both cases, whether you were internal or external, you were allowed to enter into the network. This is a dated security model, often referred to as a castle and moat, because it assumes everything inside didn't pose a threat. And of course, we've known now that that's not necessarily true. So the traditional perimeter has really been disrupted by the increasingly cloud-centric, mobile-centric, and as users roam and corporate data is distributed, the advent of this sort of zero trust security concept and architecture has arisen. And what zero trust really says, it's very simple. It says never trust and always verify, or what the industry terms as least privilege access. And what that means is that threats are going to come from every single direction, whether it's external or internal. Companies have to deal with that. And so corporate data, compute resources, and end users need to be protected regardless of location, device, and network. And so enterprises need to limit end user access to only the minimal set of applications and resources that they need to do their jobs. And think about this sort of as a lean trust model, and to make sure that the users and their systems are protected from these advanced threats. And when we talk about advanced threats, we're specifically referring to things like zero-day malware where there's no fingerprint. And you find this often in the web and email phishing attacks. So Ericom solutions help organizations who are adopting the zero trust architecture, and our isolation technology that we refer to as zero trust browsing is really about not trusting any single website, not trusting any web application, and not trusting any content inside of an email that a user may need to access. And so Ericom rather assumes that whatever target that we're talking about, web, email, or application, actually contains malware. And as a consequence, we isolate those systems so that the malware cannot infect the user, the device, and the network.
And it was only, 5 to 10 years ago that cybersecurity typically meant slowing all the machines down and creating a negative experience. But of course now, as the experience economy takes grip, we almost want to be protected and have that seamless experience at the exact same time. So can you help listeners visualize how zero trust will work in their environment? And does it actually protect data without harming that online experience that people are so fiercely protective of now?
This is cracking the code, Neil. The organization that's able to provide the robust security while still preserving the user experience is the one that's going to win out, because ultimately that's what we're seeing in the industry. And if we think about the attack vectors, and specifically for enterprises, 80% originate from web and email payloads. So let's stick with browsing isolation and the potential threats that has from the internet. And I'm going to talk about sort of how this works, because I think your question is super important for our listeners to understand that they can have the security and the efficacy of the robustness of the security from isolation while still preserving the user experience and the productivity. So in our browsing isolation experience, when an end user accesses a website from their favorite browser, Chrome or what have you, active content from that website is actually downloaded to the user's browser on their device. And that active content is things like cascading style sheets, JavaScript plugins, HTML and fonts, all kinds of things that are actually downloaded and is used by the local browser to actually render the page and show it to us as we would expect. Now, what hackers do is that they insert malware into these specific elements. They disguise them so they're hard to be detected, and so that the user gets infected merely by just visiting a URL by their browser. And these adversaries are using very sophisticated methods to do this, including social engineering techniques to lure these users to these online locations. And this is in the particular form of what we call phishing attacks. And so the net results become the same, where malware gets into the user's browser on their laptop, their mobile device, whatever endpoint they're using, and then starts to exfiltrate data. So taking out your user credentials, your login and password, your credit card information, and actually then, if you're inside the network, it starts moving laterally, potentially within the whole organization, so that data then becomes a target for other types of systems. So then you start to see that the adversary is able to move laterally once they get into the network and really attack other types of corporate assets and data. And to make this even a bigger challenge, if you're an organization, how do you know which websites are risky and which ones are safe? And this is compounded, Neil, by the fact that every single day, tens of thousands of URLs show up and shut down. And sometimes they last for mere hours. And what they're doing is, again, as part of the techniques by the adversaries, they're trying to bypass traditional security systems that would have reputations on these particular websites. And therefore, as a consequence, bypass the traditional systems and lure in these unsuspected end users. So how do we stop this? How does Ericom use remote browsing isolation to enable this concept of zero trust browsing? So the way it works is that web pages accessed by the end users are actually accessed and rendered in a remote virtual container in a cloud that's actually air-gapped from the user device and the network. And what happens is that the page content from that remote isolation environment is actually rendered in the form of a safe visual stream. So typical unsecured local web browsing for each page, you think about a website has 150 JavaScripts, 3 cascading style sheets, and 22 external URLs. Through Ericom, we've actually scrubbed all that out, and we're just sending down a visual image to the end user, to their browser. And so all they're getting really with our safe visual stream is really 3 Ericom safe JavaScripts, no CSS and no external URLs. And really that's important. And when you see our demo, and I would encourage our listeners to come in and see a demo of the Ericom Shield product to show this zero trust browsing, is that we've really taken out all the risk from the website and actually just displayed really a visual stream. Now, let me get back to the point you've talked about, the online experience. What's most important here is having the security is great, but if you can't get the buy-in from the end user, it's not gonna work. So to the end user, they're none the wiser with Ericom, because to them it appears they're actually on the website using their preferred browser. There's no agent or client on their endpoint, and they can click on links, they can play videos, and the functionality and the native web browsing experience is preserved. And so the service is available to them. It's performant. There's really no latency that's perceived by the user. But again, any of the malware that may have been in that website is in this remote browsing environment, completely isolated from the user and the network. And so when the web session is concluded by the end user, we actually safely dispose all the contents, again, in this cloud environment that's in this virtual container without ever hitting the endpoint. And if there's any download or attachment, this is really important, because how many times do you go to the web and you want to download a PDF or a Word document or even in an email? Well, we have a sanitization service that actually scans the attachment and ensures that there's nothing malicious in that document. And then once we've scanned it and we've sanitized it, then we allow the end user to download it onto their device and into the network. So just in summary, because I've said quite a bit here, zero trust browsing conforms to this never trust, always verify approach by assuming that websites, the attachments, and email links are all malicious, and then we isolate those from the end user from threat while preserving the native user experience and productivity.
So in your opinion then, David, just how big is this total addressable market for remote browsing?
It's quite large, Neil, because we've seen quite a bit of data that's been shared by analysts in the media. And if we think about the Gartner predictions, they said that they believe that within between 1 to 3 years, that enterprises will be using isolation technologies to browse the internet. And so if you think about half of the enterprises in the world using this as a way to access the internet, that's quite a lot. And Gartner believe that this is one of the top technologies for security. So these tailwinds are really important to us. And Gartner goes further on to talk about how the growth is really in these new areas that are in remote browser isolation, zero trust, and cloud access security brokers. So if you think about that and some of the information that we've actually imputed through our own market research, in our opinion, by 2024, Ericom estimates that the remote browsing total addressable market will be $4.2 billion.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Do you think there is still market education that needs to be done, especially when it comes to remote browser isolation? Because that's key as well, isn't it?
I do, Neil. I think there needs to be a lot more education in this space. You said earlier about sort of the crowdedness and the noise of cybersecurity, and it's really how do you get to the market for them to understand what's available to them in more simplistic approaches, because we've become really complicated over the years, sort of defense in depth and continuing layering on. And if you think about traditional approaches to security, such as web filtering to access known good and bad sites using secure web gateways and firewalls, these continue to be the mainstream approach. But the elevated threat landscape has put pressure on these outdated techniques, which is one of the reasons why, I mentioned Gartner earlier, and then Forrester as well, are so bullish on remote browser isolation. And if you think about how the market has evolved in isolation, earlier attempts in this decade were to actually deliver isolation technology that was focused on the endpoint. So think about basically segmenting off your endpoint, your laptop or your device, and say, okay, part of it is for executing in an isolation environment, and part of it is to do your day-to-day job. And that was not really a scalable way to do it. It was plagued by performance and cost issues. So we've now at Ericom been able to deploy our isolation service at the network level, optionally in the cloud, or in some cases where the customer wants it in their environment. And so the technology innovation around isolation is now solving for some of the issues that occurred in earlier unsuccessful attempts to offer this service. So more education, as you mentioned earlier, is needed in the market. And I think if we're going to be successful in getting the word out, it's got to be done by actual enterprise customers that are using browser isolation, that they can demonstrate to the market the power of this technology, how it will not only improve the security posture, but will also simultaneously reduce cost and complexity.
And just chatting with you today, David, it really feels that your passion for zero trust and everything that we're talking about here really shines through. So I'm curious about your backstory and how you got where you are today. So I've got to ask, what initially attracted you to Ericom?
Great question, Neil. Lot of good things attracted me to Ericom. Like many folks, I wasn't looking for an opportunity, and this one came across, and I started looking at it, and sort of what intrigued me was one was the leading edge, innovative technology that really aligns with the biggest issues that the CISOs are wrestling today in zero trust and cloud computing and mobility, and we talked about that. So that was sort of a table stakes item. But secondly, the company has been growing and profitable and has never taken institutional funding. So the idea of operating on a lean and nimble, eat what you kill mentality was super attractive to me, because you can really be nimble and really outpace some of the larger, more well-funded organizations. I think the third thing to me was the install base. Ericom has accumulated over the years tens of thousands of B2B customers, including global blue chip brands, and we're in more than 45 countries across the globe. So there's really good validation that this stuff really is working, and that the dogs will eat the dog food, if you will. I think that the two other points is the robust ecosystem that's been forming around Ericom. And this is really, really important. And if I go back to why I was brought on, is really to help expand the growth and maximize the opportunity at Ericom. And so we see the partner ecosystem as a way to accelerate that route to market and time to market. And I think the fifth thing, just to complete the answer, and maybe the most important thing, Neil, was the people. I got to meet a lot of people during the interview process, and certainly now that I've been in the company for nearly 8 months, and we are in the people business. And I've met all of our Ericom employees across all of our offices, and what I could say is that our teams are bright, they're curious, they're hungry, and we all share the passion to make a difference and leave an enduring legacy to protect the world. So it's super fun to be in this company, and I'm certainly glad I made the move.
And as someone that's right in the heart of this industry and having a lot of conversations with a lot of employees and equally a lot of customers as well, what does the cyber threat landscape look like from your side, especially here in 2019? And we're looking towards 2020 now already, which blows my mind on its own. But what are some of the more prevalent threats that you're seeing?
It's dynamic, isn't it? It certainly is. There's a new threat every day, and sort of to categorize it, I kind of always think of it in if I go back a couple years and say, okay, what was 2017 like? And that was, I remember it well. I was with Symantec, and it was the year of ransomware. And think about WannaCry and Petya and not Petya. And it even continues into this year. And think about more recently the city of Baltimore. So ransomware was certainly a big thing in 2017. And if we think about 2018, just last year, that was a year of cryptojacking. And what's cryptojacking? Cryptojacking, that's where through phishing attacks using JavaScript, it's the unauthorized use of someone else's computer to actually mine cryptocurrency. So you're sitting there thinking, tickety-boo, I'm using my computer. In the background, someone's actually using your compute resources to actually mine cryptocurrency. And think of things like PowerGhost and Cohive and BP. And then it comes to today, 2019. What's the year? The year is phishing. It really is phishing attacks. I mean, I can't tell you through partners and customers and analysts how much the conversation around phishing that we have. And we've been discussing today's session about web-borne threats and how they remain a meaningful threat vector to enterprises that we all need to worry about. And I mentioned this earlier, hackers continue to use these various techniques to spin up these malicious phishing websites, these URLs, and they bring them down just as quickly. So they last for hours, and they can be on some of the more popular websites. And you think you're going to, a certain website.com, and okay, it's safe, but it's really an extension to that website. So it's all becoming really blurry. And on top of that, they're using social engineering attacks to lure these unsuspected users to these phishing sites to gain access to their credentials, their credit card data, and so on. And all the statistics point to that despite user training, we continue to click on these embedded links in emails blindly, and we can quickly get our organization in trouble. So phishing, despite all the training, all the detection techniques that have been put in place, continues to be a huge industry for our industry.
And I appreciate you probably can't share too much, but are there any future plans at Ericom that you could share with me today or possibly talk about?
I'll do the following. There's tons of exciting stuff that we're working on and we'll be announcing publicly in the coming months. But I referenced something earlier, and that's our work with major third-party cybersecurity platform vendors. This is a real critical success factor for Ericom. We are engaged with various integrations with these cybersecurity giants in the industry with their cloud security gateways in order to provide a vital service within their platform around zero trust browsing and isolation. And so we see that, and I mentioned this earlier, as a key route to market and time to market for Ericom. And this is meaningful in three ways. As I said, it really lowers the total cost of ownership for the end customer, because if we've integrated Ericom with these partner products and platforms, it's productized between Ericom and the partner. And as a consequence, the customer doesn't have to pay for this. It's an ongoing service that we provide between the vendor and Ericom as partners. Secondly, it gives Ericom this route to market tailwinds that we talked about so often. Is how do we get out there, as a company that's just under 100 people and being bundled within a larger cybersecurity service platform is a vital way we get out there. And then finally, for a partner, it gives them a differentiation that they can have conversations with their customers on how they're deploying zero trust and zero trust browsing and how that can reduce the risk of their customers. So we see it as a win between Ericom, the partner, and the customer.
Well, I'm conscious that we've covered a lot of ground today, and we've probably left listeners with even more questions. So could you remind the listeners of where they can find you guys online and reach out and contact your team if they do have any additional questions?
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. We have a website, of course. It's www.ericom.com. That's ERICOM.com. Any queries you may want over email, contact us at info@ericom.com. And our phone number is +1 201 767 2210. And, please encourage your listeners and anyone who's out there to contact us for a demo of Ericom Shield and our zero trust browsing. We'd love to bring to life today's discussion.
Well, I've really enjoyed chatting with you today, David, and you even left us with a teaser as well about those announcements in the next few months. So it sounds like we're going to have to get you back on, and I look forward to that conversation. But more than anything, just a big thank you for coming on today. Thanks.
Likewise, Neil. I look forward to the next conversation you and I can have, and I thank you for inviting me to speak, and of course, appreciate all the listeners for tuning in.
It seems to me that companies need to accurately control who gets what access to which data. And I love the philosophy behind this zero trust model that David talked about today, and how it assumes that attackers can come from within as well as outside of the network. So no user and no device should automatically be trusted. It sounds such a simple approach, but it's the first time I've heard of anything like this. Because traditional security technology, such as firewalls, intrusion prevention, and VPNs, again, are all based on that assumption that there is already a secure perimeter established. So the fact that Zero Trust is claiming the opposite, and organisations are not to automatically trust anything inside or outside its perimeters by default, feels incredibly refreshing. And the end result, of course, is reducing organisational risk by preventing any unauthorised users such as cybercriminals or even insider threats from accessing pertinent data, applications, services, and just about everything else that you can think of there. But I really, really enjoyed chatting with David today. Hit it off with him straight away, and I'd love to meet up with him and grab a beer and put the world to rights one day. But you've heard from him, you've heard from me. Now over to you. What are your thoughts? As always, email me techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter @NeilCHughes, and all my other social channels, podcast episodes, and everything else you can find over at techblogwriter.com. cybersecuritymarket.co.uk. I think there was some good old-fashioned mirroring going on in today's interview because David's passion for all things cybersecurity kind of rubbed off on me a little bit. I feel a bit excitable now. I'm going to make myself a nice cup of tea and bring it down a little bit before I annoy my wife too much, and I'll return tomorrow with another guest. So thanks for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.